It's my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, David Corey. What I'm really excited about is that although David presented last time, I was not able to attend his presentation because that was our first conference. I was running around doing a whole bunch of other things. But this time, I'm the session moderator, so I get to sit in on this presentation. David is a leadership development coach, trainer, and consultant known for his expertise in applying the concept of emotional intelligence to individuals and organizational performance improvement. In the course of his work, David has been an invited guest of the Sultan of Brunei, worked under armed guard in Nigeria, been kicked out of a restricted area in Saudi Arabia, chased by an elephant in Zambia, which happens to be my birthplace, and sang for royalty in Malaysia. David's company has also done work for the Republic of Botswana, and David was a closing keynote speaker at the Asia HRD Congress in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia in July 2016 for the third time. Without further ado, I'm going to hand things over to David. David will probably run you through the process with the chat function. Because of the technical issues, I will be reading out the chat comments. Over to you, David.
Thank you so much, Kalpana. It's great to be here. Welcome, everyone. It's so great to be in front of this audience again, however, under slightly different circumstances. And so this presentation is about leadership. What do we mean by leading? And we at our company, we take leadership in a very broad meaning. We think that everyone has to lead their own lives first and foremost. And so, leadership, being a good leader, has a lot to do with being a good person and leading your own life well. And of course, the environment is completely different. It is a first for many of us. I don't know, hands up for all of you who have lived through a pandemic before. So it's how do we conduct business? How do we carry on in this volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous environment? And I like the term VUCA. It's a really great way to describe the world today with all of its interesting features, which we're going to explore today. And we're going to look at this concept of emotional intelligence. What does being emotionally intelligent have to do? How can it help you to be better to deal with the environment that you're operating under? You take a look online these days and you take a look at and see what's topical, what's trending, what people are talking about. And these are things like this next slide here that I have for you. So we've got this study that was done by Deloitte. And what they were looking at was they were looking at and asking managers in organizations, what does it take to lead in the 21st century? And of course, this was done in 2019 before the COVID pandemic. And so it's interesting to think that back a year ago, 81% said that it's really critical and important that managers have the ability to lead through complexity, through more complexity and ambiguity. So that's interesting. Then there's this idea of leading through influence, which of course is to a great extent is your ability to impact on others and influence others, ability to manage on a remote basis. So that was interesting. So 50% said that in the 21st century, we were going to have to manage people on a remote basis. And now here we are in the pandemic. And my guess is that number is considerably increased. The ability to manage a workforce with a combination of humans and machines. We're never going to be totally mechanized. And so there's always going to be humans operating those machines and the ability to lead more quickly. So we've got sort of three we've got all four of the acronym letters of VUCA described there in that little survey result. And so what I'd like you to do is, and I would encourage you to think about your situation and think about work right now for you. And I'd like you to think about whether you are in fact, whether you would in fact characterize your workplace by being volatile, And we're going to get more into the meaning of these words in a deeper way shortly. But for right now, which best describes your workplace? And I'd like you to to type that into the chat box, and then Kalpna, if you wouldn't mind reading out some of those, just to to comment on what comes in. But would you best describe it as volatile, or would you say that uncertainty is something that dominates, or is it the complexity of it, or is it the ambiguity of it all? And again, we're going to get more into the actual meaning of these words shortly. But just right now, I thought it would be interesting to just do a quick temperature check on the audience and find out what you think, as to whether there's one of those that you would say characterizes your workplace the most. Kalpna, are people typing into the comments?
Yes, people are.
Excellent.
I've got some people saying that it's about half, and it's actually kind of evenly divided between them. I've got Darcy saying it's complex. I've got Andy saying it's uncertain. I've got Jeremy saying it's volatile and uncertain. Dave saying it's uncertain. Adriana saying some uncertain, some ambiguity. Terry saying uncertain.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everyone, for participating. That is awesome. And really, one of the issues is how do we ourselves make it through this? And the other is, how can we be that leader that people are looking to? How can we role model the way forward? What are the skills and what are the abilities? Well, first, I thought we'd take a closer look at each of these 4 areas of VUCA. And VUCA, as you may know, was first described by the American Military College as a way of describing various scenarios that they were sending the troops into. So how do we understand how dangerous or how important it is to be aware of certain things? Well, they came up with this acronym, and we're going to dive a little bit deeper into that right now. So let's first look at volatility. What do we mean by volatility? There are lots of definitions, of course, and you may have your own definition. And once again, I would encourage you to use that chat box, and Kalpna, just chime in anytime someone types in something interesting and relevant to the discussion. And of course, sometimes you can just read what people are writing and include that as well. So one definition is the tendency to change quickly. It has to do with the rate of change. Another definition is it's explosive, right? It's just it's so volatile that it just explodes, and that's a quick change, of course, absolutely. And then, of course, because we're human and we have this incredible ability to have an emotional response to everything that we perceive, then what are the associated emotions that go along with volatility? Well, I was thinking about this and thinking, well, one of the things is that it makes me uneasy. I feel a sense of unease with rapid change, a sense of anxiety. That one comes up a lot for all 4 of these areas of VUCAs, is that it produces anxiety. And we're talking about not necessarily the kind of capital A anxiety that you might have to see a counselor or a psychotherapist for, or you may. And of course, there's nothing wrong with that. We totally promote and encourage people. If you need someone to deal with something that you're unable to deal with on your own, then we strongly support that idea of seeing a counselor or a therapist. Then there's just the irritation that comes from, another change. We got to go through that again. And then there's confusion. It's like, okay, so yesterday it was this, today it's this. And just that feeling of influx. I don't know, that's not actually an emotion, influx, but I think it's kind of descriptive. It's like, okay, so I just want to land on something. I want things to kind of, stay the same for a little while. We humans, we love this biological concept of homeostasis, right? We want everything to be in the right balance. sense, and then we don't want it to change. And then when it does, well, that's something that we have to adjust to. We have to, and so when rapid change is forced on us, our response is kind of to resist change. So we see some of these behaviors in volatility. We see change resistance. We see people purposefully sabotaging change, and we see people who appear to be rigid, inflexible. We sometimes see increased risk taking. It's like, well, if that's what's happening around here, if that's the way we're going, then let's risk it all. And then we probably see other behaviors. And so this is your opportunity once again to type into the chat box. What other behaviors do you see as a result of this incredible volatility, this incredible rapid change, this incredible, stay tuned, because, we may have different marching orders coming up. So I'll let you type those in, and in a moment we'll get back to that. But I was thinking of, okay, so what are some COVID examples of this? Well, COVID examples would be changing schedules based on who we need and how can we keep our workplace, our physical workplace safe, who can be here, who can't, how are we going to physically distance. So there's changing schedules, there's changing work rules. So you can do some things that you used to be able to do, but you can't do others. Changing procedures and processes. And then there may be other examples that you can think of. Once again, please type those into the chat box. So Kalpana, what are people typing?
Okay, so I do have some feedback, and some of this is actually from a little bit earlier on too, where people saying that they can't all work together, so that's changing for them.
Right.
Someone else mentioned about how the aging infrastructure is creating fire drills, and they're just in a constant state of anxiety. Someone else mentioned about an issue with regards to becoming more introverted. And
Right.
also not being able to work with the team results in people kind of getting disconnected from the team.
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah, all of these challenges. Anything else coming up?
Not quite yet. There's a little bit of a lag sometimes, so that might be the case, but
Okay.
I'll let you know as soon as I hear.
Okay. All right. So so that's volatility, and again we just want to say that this is describing the environment or the situation. We're not talking about someone who is volatile here, although that may be true. Someone may be volatile, but we're talking about the situation. We're talking about circumstances, in many cases, circumstances beyond our control. Okay, so that's volatility. Let's turn our attention to uncertainty for a moment. Anything before we go on, Kalpana, that someone's typed in?
Yes, I do have a couple. One of them, Andrew talked about how it's affecting team morale. Doug talked
Right.
about how some staff are starting at 6 and then every 30 minutes after to keep contact down, and the team is disconnecting a bit as a result. And
Right.
then Ben says, well, on the plus side, people who can adapt become really good at reacting to change, and teams can become stronger if the opportunity can be seized.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. So great. I love that that you pointed out and observed some positivity in all this. And I noted the same thing with respect to all of the TV personalities that were now broadcasting from their home. I thought that was so great. It's like, okay, so that's your kitchen. That's where you live. It's like letting us get to know people and having them be a little bit more exposed, a little bit more vulnerable, which leads to greater connection. We actually desire that greater connection with each other. We like to have more information about other people, and so that's really interesting. And yes, it's not all bad. So some people really search for and look for these volatile kinds of industries, these volatile kinds of workplaces, and they thrive on it. That's what gets them excited. That's what keeps them engaged. Is that incredible rate of change? But it's not for everybody, and some people are going to have an adverse reaction to it, and that's what we want to be on the lookout for. That's who we want to support. And that's where we want to come up with ways of, again, staying connected, even though we're working remotely, and or providing support to people who are not doing this well and for whom this is not a fun thing. This is actually the exact opposite and creates great anxiety. Okay, let's look at uncertainty. The definition of uncertainty is an unknown future. It's insufficient information. It is that state of not being certain. And what's interesting is that we human beings have differing levels of need for certainty. And you may know people who have a high need for certainty. Those people like to get all the information. They like to make all their plans. They like to have a lot of control over the situation. And now in this state of the pandemic, this is really difficult to and a huge challenge to get all the information to. And so many things are unknown, and we definitely have insufficient information. And even the medical professionals who we pay attention to and listen to, they don't have the information that they want about this virus. The emotions, ance again, anxiety and uncertainty go hand in glove. It's like, and anxiety is a very interesting emotion in that it is nonspecific. And so it is actually in response to not knowing how to feel, to not knowing what's going to happen, to that insufficient information and that unknown. And then there's this nervousness that some of us feel. It's like, okay, so if I do this, what's going to happen? Well, we don't know. So there's risk taking involved in that. There's a fear that something bad is going to happen next. There's a pessimism that because we can't know, that again, it's going to be negative. And the behaviors are many, and they are worry, second guessing. What's the worst case scenario, and focusing on that. There's the lack of sleep, the poor health, the lower immunity, and many others. Please feel free to type into the chat box some of the behaviors that you're seeing as a result of the uncertainty. It's a very sad, tragic, and extreme situation. But one of our alumni, a fellow who was in one of our courses, actually ended his life as a result of what happened to his business because of COVID. And so, that's an extreme and sad and unfortunate behavior, but it's there. People just cannot cope with that unknown, and so they go to the worst case scenario and decide that that's something they can't live with, and it's very sad and tragic. And again, it's about how can we support people who are potentially in this situation, and we're gonna take a look at some of the ways that we can do that momentarily. So again, make it COVID specific, and there's worry about. There's just general worry. And then there's worry about specifically my job. Is it still going to be there? Are they still going to need me? What about my income? What am I going to do is the business and the organization going to continue? How's that going to go? How am I going to make ends meet? How am I going to, feed my family, house my family? And there may be many other great examples of COVID uncertainty. So, Kalpana, what are people typing in to the chat box, if anything, at this time, and how does it relate to uncertainty?
Okay, so one comment here, it's actually, once again, it's kind of heard from earlier on, is with some people, an issue with being careless. It's like, hey, life is short, so I'm not going to worry about the risks of COVID. And then another one here is about the worrying about the possibility of having to quarantine on site away from family for extended periods of time. And we've seen this in some cases in the US especially. We have a comment that was from David. We have a comment here from Jeremy. Worrying about my job and my income. Businesses are going under. Will my wage be reduced?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And again, I go back to that anxiety because it's just such a pervasive and common response to uncertainty. And we're going to look at a couple of things that you can do about this to lessen that uncertainty and increase, even in the face of overwhelming odds, increase that level of certainty that you can have about the future to some extent. Okay, so that's the U part of VUCA, the uncertainty part, and we're going to now take a look at complexity. So one definition, and there are many definitions, and I realize there's lots of overlapping of these terms and this terminology, and so it's kind of interesting to think about what makes it different. So with complexity, this is the idea that there are many interconnected variables, an overwhelming number of system-related parts and pieces. And so the greater number of moving parts, the greater the complexity. And it reminds me of the old joke about the mechanic and the surgeon talking about how their jobs might be somewhat similar, and the mechanic saying, "Yeah, I think my job's very similar to your job as a surgeon. I work on these very complex engines," and the surgeon then says, "Well, at least you can turn off the engine before you work on it." I don't have that luxury. So talk about complexity. And emotions that go along with complexity are things like overwhelm. Just there's so much, you just don't know what to do. You can't even know where to begin, and you're kind of frozen. Then there's incredible confusion that comes with, how do we sort this out? How do we actually gain some sort of clarity? There's exhaustion that comes from, it's just, again, just too much. There's a feeling of being out of control. Again, that you want to control things in your life, and now there's just too many of them, and you can't possibly. There's a rigidity that comes from that, that frozenness, that it's just too much. I can't take this anymore. I don't know how to deal with this. And the behaviors, there's a strong desire to simplify or even oversimplify, and that's not helpful, right? It's like, no, we're just going to do this, but there's all these other things, and so how are we going to include and integrate those other moving parts? There's a desire for more research, more study, when possibly action is actually required. So okay, we've done enough focus groups or talked to enough people or looked at enough research. We have to do something. What are we going to do? And there may be other behaviors that you've seen as a result of complexity. And so please feel free to type that into the chat box, and momentarily we'll ask Kalpana to read over some of your responses. So some COVID examples are the complexity of how we're going to work remotely. In some cases, that is, I was just having a conversation with my optometrist yesterday, who was saying that she can't work remotely. And I'm saying, well, is that really true? I mean, my guess is that in the future, we're going to be staring into the computer, and our optometrist is going to be performing some of those same tests, some of those same observations, etc., remotely, and with incredibly complex technology. How are we going to continue the business? How are we going to keep revenue coming in? How are we going to operate with minimal staff and others? And so again, what are those examples of complexity that you've experienced in your work, in your workplace, that you have to deal with? Kalpana, are people typing into the chat box in response to complexity?
I'm pretty sure I'll get some more responses soon. There's a little bit of a lag here, but I can tell you, and I've typed this into the chat box, everyone has that. Basically, at the EOCP, we had contingency plans in place for fire, flood, earthquake, and they came into use during the pandemic. So what we had to think about, because we're not a government agency, and we depend on revenues for services that we provide. So how do we continue providing the services? How do we keep everyone employed? And basically, it required a lot of team input.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yes, and I love that you added that team input, because this is requiring us to get other people involved, to collaborate like never before. That no one person is going to have the answers here, and it's one of our key messages, in fact, that nobody has to do this alone. And so we strongly encourage developing the emotional intelligence skills, as we're going to talk about, in order to have that kind of collaboration with others. All right, the last one. Anything?
I have
oh,
some
okay,
feedback.
Great, good.
I have some feedback. Yeah, so it's just, it all comes in together, and so Darcy says the ever-changing, interconnected variables, some working from home, some on site, and trying to still keep everyone on the same page. Ben says the challenge with complexity is just knowing where to start. Jeremy, actually I'll go back up here. John saying, very often the complexity, the response sometimes is, it's not going to work. Another comment from Jeremy is water treatment plant operators are stressed out about COVID and having to isolate everyone if one operator gets sick. And well, who will run the plant? Who will do the tests? Who will take the samples? Dave says in public works, we still need to keep things running no matter what water, sewer, and all other things that his team does to keep the town running. Those things need to be done. And another comment from Ben, sometimes it's just as you say, getting the team together for a brainstorming session.
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you so much for all of your contributions. Yeah. And, I love the fact that some of this comes in all these questions. Who's going to do this? How is this going to happen? How are we going to, against all odds, in some cases, carry on what is an essential service? How are we going to do that? Given the limitations, the barriers, the required procedures, etc. So excellent, great. Now, okay, so we got one left, and that's ambiguity. And ambiguity, the definition of ambiguity is open to multiple interpretations and meanings. So that's interesting. So we're all looking at the same thing, and we may have different interpretations of what that is. So who's right, and what is the way forward? And again, there's that anxiety. It's like, okay, so this can be communicated in multiple ways. How am I to know? So there's the interconnectedness between some of these concepts. So the ambiguity is totally connected to the uncertainty, because interpretations can change. And there's anxiety, there's confusion, there's fear, and there's many other emotions. And so if you can think of other emotions that go into a response to ambiguity, please type those in. And then we've got these behaviors. Ambiguity leads to inaction. If you're not clear what to do, if someone has not mapped out your course of action for you, and you're reliant on that person or that leader, you're not going to do anything, because it's just like, okay, so I don't want to make a mistake. I don't want to put lives in jeopardy, which is possible given the work environment that many of you are in. I don't want to take an incorrect action. I don't want to make a mistake or misjudgment. And then there's the frequent questioning. Well, what about this? And what about this? And how do we understand this? And there's many others. And again, if you've got other behaviors that in response to the ambiguity that we're living under, please type those in. So some COVID examples are, what are the appropriate precautions and protocols for this situation, for this plant, for this shift, for this team, for this group? How do I keep myself safe? How do I keep my employees safe? And then you're on your way home at the end of having to have exposed yourself to other people whose you don't know anything about. There's the uncertainty. You don't know whether they're staying safe. You don't know whether they just had a big family gathering and invited people who were not taking care of physical distancing and wearing masks, etc. So now you're going home after being with those people and going home to your family. How do I keep my family safe? And so there are all of these questions, and the answers again are ambiguous. There's a lot of interpretations of what the correct answer is for those things, and I want to just make it abundantly clear that we do not think these things through without our emotional response system kicking in. Without feeling some anxiety, some confusion, some fear, some frustration, some irritation, some anger, etc. There is all of that. And it's one of the key messages of emotional intelligence is that all of that's going on. We can be aware of it, we can know about it, we can be intelligent about it, or not. And some people are, and some people are not. Kalpna, have people commented on ambiguity and their situation in the chat box?
If I may, I'm just going to read out a couple of ones that came in with regards to complexity. And one of them, and then I'll go on to the ambiguity ones because, as I said, there's a little bit of a lag here. So Jeremy mentioned that he had to update his emergency response plans so that operators from neighboring communities would be able to come in and help out with his system should he or his backup operators fall ill. And or they might be working on supporting other organizations. Rachel says that having the combination of people working from home and from the office, different environments and adaptations are required. Different internet speeds and levels of privacy, video calls in an open office format, quite difficult to keep up with. Because of the constant movement. Another comment that's actually from me is I was trying to reach out to our operators with the most current and most valid information because there was a lot of information and a lot of misinformation on what to believe and what not to believe was difficult. And an example is a key one that still remains contentious is with regards to masks. Should you wear masks? Should you not? Are there, the consensus is that you should wear masks, but there's still people that don't believe in that. David said that they had a third-hand exposure at their plant, and now we're wondering how to be safe while they're waiting for results. And Jeremy also mentioned, just related to a comment as well, is there's lots of comments from staff on whom to trust. CNN, Trump, Bonnie Henry, Facebook, workers' companies, WorkSafe BC was sometimes giving information that was contradictory, and so it was like the goalposts were shifting and trying to keep on track with new policies to develop because of these changing requirements.
Absolutely. Yeah. Anything else, Kalpna?
Not right now, no.
Okay, great. All right, fantastic. Okay, so it's so interesting to me that you may not have attended this presentation and you would have carried on, but you would have been dealing with all the same stuff. You just wouldn't have talked about it. You wouldn't have maybe had it kind of crystallized for you in your mind what you're actually going through and what you're actually facing. And really, this whole thing is based on this fact that our brains process logic and emotion at the same time. And so you're thinking through what to do, and you're dealing with the emotion, which is your biochemical response to various stimuli in your environment, and you're having to contend with both. Okay, so what is the decision that I have to make here? What's the most logical and rational decision? that I'm making while I'm feeling anxious, while I'm feeling nervous, while I'm feeling whatever it is that your response is to the situation. There's one neuroscience researcher who talks about emotions as data, and they are data that many of us overlook. If we are not intentionally paying attention to what's going on in our bodies, because there is a physiological sensation associated with every emotion. And if we had time and inclination, we could talk more about the physical sensation of something like anger. And you all know it. You all can describe what that physiological sensation is of anger, even anxiety. You know what that's like. Some people describe it as butterflies in the stomach, and it's an interesting description because it's pretty accurate. That when we're feeling anxious, our stomachs produce more stomach acid, and yeah, it does feel like butterflies are flying around in our stomachs because of that anxiety. And we also have great neuroscience research to show how various emotions support our ability to use our logic and reason, and various emotions actually hinder our ability to use our logic and reason. So what do? How do we get more intelligent about emotions? Well, one of the leading models in the world was originally created by Dr. Reuven Bar-On in the 1980s for his PhD dissertation, and it is now the basis for an online assessment tool called the Emotional Quotient Inventory. So what we do in our business is we work with leaders to help them to become more aware of how they're operating in the various 15 emotional skills that are measured by the Emotional Quotient Inventory. And so you can see that the model is divided up into 5 categories of skills. So one is about self-perception. How are you perceiving yourself? The second is, how are you expressing yourself? Then there's the whole area of the interpersonal realm of EQ. How are you connecting with others? Building teams, building collaboratives. How are you making decisions? And there's 3 aspects to making decisions, which we're going to talk a little bit more about momentarily. Then there's the idea that we human beings, as much as we think we would like to live stress-free lives, we actually don't do well in stress-free. In stress-free, we do nothing. And that gets boring. So we actually desire some level of stress. We want stress. So we put ourselves in situations where there is stress, and then we have to manage it, or it gets to be too much for us. So there are competencies that help us to manage stress. And so at the center of the model, you can see this concept of emotional intelligence, this idea that we human beings can be, with a little skill and a little knowledge, we can be more intelligent about the fact that we experience emotions. And then there are various skills and competencies, all of which can be developed and improved so that people, again, can deal with the volatility, the uncertainty, the complexity, and the ambiguity of the environments in which we live and work. And so that's what our little company does. Is we work one-to-one with leaders to improve their skills in these areas. And we work with teams and divisions and departments in organizations, design leadership training based on this model. So we're going to look at this model and more how it applies specifically to the VUCA model that I introduced to you. So here we have 2 models to contend with, and we'll look at, what are we human beings to do. First of all, I'm going to show you the report of a senior executive who I was working with, and this is 1 page from a highly detailed emotional quotient inventory report, and you can see that that there's this gold bar across the top of the other bars, and the gold bar is the top 50% of scores of of a group of high-performing leaders. So they gave this group of high-performing leaders the same EQI and then plotted their scores, and that's kind of like something to shoot for. Now, there's also a comparison with a representative sample of the North American population with the mean of 100. So that's the mean of 100. It's a normal bell curve, and so we're looking at areas between 85 and 115 as kind of the typical range, and then we're concerned about numbers that are lower, and we want to make sure that there's an appropriate balance of all of these skills and competencies. So we see that this individual has a very high emotional expression at 121, so that appears to be a good thing, that he's able to express his emotions, and then we see the governor or the regulator for that emotional expression, which is impulse control, the ability to be patient and to wait for the right time for things, and that's only 72. So very low score in impulse control. As it turns out, this guy was inappropriately expressing his emotions in the workplace. And you can imagine, put that guy in a pressure situation, like a VUCA situation, and it would be even worse. Ultimately, while we were making some progress, and I went away for the December holidays, thinking that he was doing great, came back in January to find out that he had been terminated, that the rest of the senior executive team could not tolerate his behavior any longer. But this is a way that we sort of help people to become more aware of how they're operating at a foundational level, and then we can zero in and focus our coaching and training, etc. So now let's turn our attention to looking at VUCA and how maybe we can learn something about how to respond to the various areas of VUCA. So with respect to volatility, I love this little guy because he kind of demonstrates that, imagine this little guy in volatility. How's he going to do? He's probably going to do okay. Because something about him seems to give off this idea that he's centered, he's grounded, he's positive, and he's stable. And so these are some of the things that we need to help to develop in ourselves in order to respond to and be okay with volatility. One of my favorite sayings is the ship was never meant to stay in the harbor, and that's a little bit like us human beings, that we weren't meant to stay home and do very little. We're meant to go out into the world, and the world can be a rough place at times, and certainly characterized by volatility. And so for us to do well and be okay, we have to have a good sense of self-regard. We have to know ourselves. We have to know what we're about, and we have to the best of our abilities, be centered and grounded in our values, and have a stable self-regard, so that no matter what happens, it doesn't actually tip the scales and cause us to not, again, have a healthy view of our competency, of our confidence, and our ability to move forward. So self-regard is important for volatility. Emotional self-awareness. Once again, this concept or this idea of feelings as data, those emotions are telling you something. Your emotional response when you walk into a room, when you get certain pieces of information, when you hear about what is on your to-do list, that emotional response is data for you. And so better to improve and increase your ability to tap into that, to know what that's about. And then we've got this, and again, leaders who have healthy self-regard are the leaders that you're comfortable around, the leaders that you want to be around, that the leaders that, if it's too high, you can also see that too high on any of these things is not a good thing either. So you probably know some leaders whose self-regard who think that they're maybe better than they actually are, in which case that makes people uncomfortable as well, and they come across as arrogant. So then there's emotional expression. Or well, let's talk about leaders who possess emotional self-awareness. First of all, they are the ones who seem to know what they're doing, and who seem to rely on those inner guideposts in order to direct their actions and their behaviors. They seem to be able to use those feelings as data for their decision making, etc. And then there's emotional expression, and we've got managers who we coach and one-to-one, and they ask us, why do I have to express my emotions with my team? Don't I just have to deal with the technical aspects of the work that we do? Well, emotional expression is key to building trust. That we don't trust what we don't know, and we can't know you unless you express your feelings. And we use the iceberg diagram in our workshops, and say that we human beings are a bit like the iceberg. There's this bit that's sticking up over the top of the surface, and there's this huge part below the surface. And with all that's going on beneath the surface, we don't necessarily know what that is unless you choose to share that with us. And when you do, when you show what's actually going on, when you share a bit of your vulnerability, just like when people share their homes on camera, it's like, oh, okay, so that's more about who that person is. That's more information. That's actually addresses the uncertainty that we have about humans. When they don't share anything, then we're left to guess. We make assumptions. We try to guess what they're about. We try to guess who they are and what's going on for them. And of course, when we assume, nothing good comes from that. So we have to learn to express our feelings, to be known to others, to be known by others, so that we can get support. When we say, hey, I'm feeling anxious here, and that is met with, hey, me too. Let's feel anxious together. Let's talk about that experience and what that's like. And relationships are built on emotional expression. If there's low emotional expression, your relationship is likely fairly superficial. And how interpersonal relationships is one way to, again, prepare yourself for volatility, is that you don't have to do this alone. That there are lots of people in your life, people in your work life, on your work team, your leader, people that you lead, who want to support you. They just don't know that you need it unless you express your feelings, and unless you actually start talking about some of these issues that we're all going through. Flexibility. The flexibility to be able to go with this rapid change, to accept what is outside your ability to control. And please type your questions in as they come up for you. Type them in the chat box, and we'll go to Kalpna before we change slides and just talk a little bit about volatility, or a little bit about some of the EQ competencies that we're talking about here, and make sure that we answer your questions as we go. Finally, there's the concept of stress tolerance. To know that you can take it, that you can, go out on the stormy seas and be able to cope with and take whatever comes up, is critical and important in order to help you with volatility. Now, many competencies from our model are going to help you with volatility. These are just a few. So I wanted to review these few. And really, what's the goal? The goal is to keep your eye on the horizon. I know some of you are sailors, and you know that seasickness for some of us is an issue. But when you're able to focus on the horizon, keep the horizon in your view, you can have that vision, and even when things are unsteady around you, if you can maintain a steadiness of vision, of what you want to accomplish, what you want to do, what the goal is for you, then that's going to help you in those times of volatility. Okay, Kalpna, anybody type anything in, any questions, comments, as we've been talking about volatility and emotional intelligence?
One of the ones that's come up, I think would probably be applicable to everyone, whether they've responded or not, is suggestion on some stress management techniques. A lot of people are very, very stressed right now, so what can they do?
Absolutely. So stress tolerance. There are many tactics and strategies that can help people to tolerate the stress that they're experiencing. We sometimes in our training we use the Yerkes Dodson curve, and if you're really interested in this stuff, you can just type in Yerkes, Yerkes, and Dodson, and see their original stress performance curve that they created in 1908 to understand how human beings respond to stress. In the beginning, it's just a bell curve. You probably have seen it at some point or another. But in the beginning, it's a period of low stress. And in low stress, we have this period of or this place of inaction. We don't take action unless there's a reason to respond to something. And then there's this area. So we call that too little stress. Then there's this area of optimal stress, and that's where we all want to be. And then, of course, on the other side of the bell curve, there's too much stress leading to burnout. And so we want to first of all identify where we are on the stress curve. And so that might be an interesting exercise, is to find an image of the Yerkes-Dodson performance curve, sometimes called the Yerkes-Dodson law. Print it off, share it around the team, the office. Where are you on this stress curve? And what's that about? So starting to understand more about what those stressors are, try to name those stressors, and take a look and see which of those stressors there are things that you can do, and which are out of your control. Sometimes reminds me of the old that wonderful serenity prayer, and we strongly encourage the wisdom found in the serenity prayer, which was created by Reinhold Niebuhr, an American preacher in the early 1950s, which has been adopted by the Alcoholics Anonymous movement, and it is, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. The serenity to grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. Grant me the courage to change the things I can. And courage comes up here as well, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. The courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. So what can you change and what can you not change? And then there are all the wonderful tactics. And these tactics can be very personal. So what works for you when you're just experiencing a great deal of stress and you need to do something to reduce that stress? So one of the most simplest things and wonderful things you can do is to take a deep breath. And it sounds funny and it sounds trite, but actually when we take a deep breath, we're actually expanding the rib cage, putting pressure on the vagus nerve, which runs along the back of the thoracic cavity, which stimulates the release of acetylcholine, which calms us right down. And so it's not just a trite thing to take a deep breath or several deep breaths. It actually has a physiological and a neuroscience reason behind it. Beyond taking a deep breath, it might be, getting up and going for a walk, taking a break, drinking some water, and it might be working out, going for a run. So all of these tactics need to be built into your day, and that reminds me of the story of Stephen Covey, which is sharpening the saw. In the book, Stephen Covey describes this person walking along the forest. There's a guy sawing a tree. Many of you know this story. He's sawing away, sweating profusely, breathing hard, and the traveler walking along says, "What are you doing?" The guy says, "I'm sawing this tree." But it's not going well. And the guy says, "Why is it not going well?" And he says, "Well, the saw is dull." And the guy says, "Well, why don't you stop and sharpen the saw?" And the guy says, "I don't have time." So this is about, taking that time, making that time for self-care, making that time to sort of build up your ability to deal with what you've got to deal with, and making the time to do that. We all have the same 168 hours a week. It's about taking some of that and making sure that you're doing some things to build your ability to take more stress. And it's not about doing more. It's not about, raising your performance to the next level, which is kind of the Olympic athlete analogy. This is about just coping with what you've got on your plate right now. And you can do that. What else, Kalpna?
Okay, so in terms of the stress component, I've had people kind of talk about what works for them. Someone said physical exercise. Someone said meditation. Someone, I think, jokingly said medication. I put in my own comment as a term Shinrin Yuko, Japanese phrase that means forest bathing, and I do that with my 2 dogs, and I call them my therapists.
Awesome. Anything else?
Not right now, no.
Okay, great. And you'll see that there's a lot of overlap here. We may find that some of these suggestions and some of these strategies will apply in other areas. Let's look at uncertainty. Okay, so with uncertainty, remember the problem with uncertainty is the lack of information. So what's an EQ competency that you can use? Well, assertiveness. Ask for what you need. Ask for clarity, ask for confirmation, ask for information that may be available. Again, this is part of the courage to change the things you can. What can you do except just accepting what is? Well, you can, ask more questions. You can speak up. You can make that need that you have known. And then there's emotional expression. What's it like not to know? Share that with other people. Say, this uncertainty is so frustrating to me. There's a wonderful book and a wonderful researcher named Daniel Siegel, and he talks about this concept of name it to tame it. So when you actually say, I'm feeling so anxious or feeling so angry about what's going on or feeling so irritated. When you say that, they've shown that it actually lowers the cortisol level in your bloodstream. And so emotional expression, we've all heard the old saying, don't bottle it up, don't stuff it down. There's actually good physiological research to show that it's important to express, get it out with someone that you trust, with someone appropriate. Just share what's going on there. And again, we have to encourage leaders in our coaching and training to take more risks in sharing their emotions with others. Say to the team, hey, I'm worried here. I'm concerned about what's going on. I'm feeling anxious about the future. I don't know what's going on and I don't like it and it doesn't feel good to me. So however you go about that, people are going to respect it. They're going to, as long as it's authentic, people are going to respect it. People are going to admire you for doing it, for taking that risk to be vulnerable. And that's courage. That's real courage. Another EQ competency that's important for uncertainty here is empathy. Empathy is really being with others in whatever emotion they're experiencing. So it involves paying attention. What is going on for other people? What's it like for others who don't have the information? Remembering, and I think this is one of the single biggest errors that leaders make globally, and I've worked in many cultures with this model, is that some leaders, a lot of leaders, think everybody else is like them. They don't understand why people have a lower work ethic. They don't necessarily understand why people are stressed out. And they may take the traditional and outmoded view of just suck it up and move on. Which is actually not empathy. It's the exact opposite of empathy, and that is empathy brings people together. Empathy increases collaboration, invites collaboration. Empathy is a unifying force. It is a relationship deepening force, and we can all learn how to be better at empathy. Problem solving is a very specific EQ competency, and it involves understanding all of the emotions that swirl around problem solving, some of which support our problem solving moving forward, and a lot of it hindering. And we don't necessarily recognize procrastination as an emotional problem solving issue, but it is. And so, we don't often recognize worry as a hindering problem solving issue, but it is. And we don't often recognize overwhelm as the problem solving issue that it is. So with problem solving, we ask ourselves, what's the real issue here? Okay, so yes, we have uncertainty. There's a lot unknown. So for me specifically, in my circle of influence, what is it that I'm facing? What is that issue? And maybe starting there, because if looking around just makes it all too overwhelming. Reality testing. We all are biased, and it's about understanding what our biases are, and knowing how to mitigate against those unconscious biases. This is the argument for diversity. It's one of many arguments for diversity. Is how can we include differing perspectives? How can we include differing views and perceptions on this issue, on this set of circumstances, and invite input? Have everybody test your perception, because your perception is your reality, but it's not necessarily the reality shared by everyone else. So be sure to share that. Again, key message here is don't keep things to yourself. If you keep things to yourself, you could be isolating yourself in your thinking and your emotions, when really what we need to do now is to band together. We need to share, we need to connect. We'll all get through this, but not alone. Nobody gets through this alone. We only get through this together. The goal is for greater certainty. What do we know for sure? When I combine what I know with what you know and with what everybody knows, we have a greater level of certainty than we had before. And so again, we have to go to others. We have to go to teamwork. We have to go to collaborating and involving everyone. Okay, Kalpna, anybody type in any questions or comments related to uncertainty?
Just some comments here in terms of there's basically some discussions out there. A lot of people who are considered high performing or highly successful are actually now on anti-anxiety medication, which is worrisome.
Yes.
Then someone else commented in terms of, needing to talk to someone, or, in terms of that expression, it's not, your spouse is not always the best solution. And then I do have a question, and that is, how do you suggest leaders give themselves permission to take time to perform this type of self-care?
Excellent question. And the answer is, again, we always say that anybody can improve, but it requires awareness of the need for change. So, that leader in question, they are likely going to keep doing what they do until they realize the need for change. So that's something that we can help with. We can actually give leaders feedback. It's like, when was the last time you took a break? Or, I can't help but notice that you haven't been eating at your usual time, or whatever it is. Just giving that feedback, helping leaders to gain that awareness of the need to do something about their situation, and make time for that self-care. Anything else, Kalpna?
Yeah, actually, I did have another one, and that is with regards to leaders who just give, it seems like they give so much empathy, they basically, it's like an empathy drain after a while, and it's like they're giving and giving and giving and not taking the time to take care of themselves.
Absolutely. We sometimes suggest the analogy of the recording studio mixing board, with all the sliders that slide up and down. And imagine that these 15 things are on this board, and the board goes from self to other. And if you've got all the sliders towards you, that might be really good for you, but not good for others. And if you've got all the sliders pushed all the way towards others, that it's all of you, that you are all about others, that's not good for you. So what is the optimal balance for each one of us? That's the thing we have to discover. And again, the person who has the high, they may have a high empathy score on the EQI. And it's like, okay, so does that empathy ever not serve you? Does that empathy ever possibly put some sort of strain on you that wouldn't be there if you weren't so concerned with other people? And if the answer is yes, okay, so then what can we do about that? Again, how can we introduce a little bit more self-care? How can we introduce a little bit more of what it is that you really need and want? And of course, those things are found in other aspects of the EQ model, things like self-actualization. You know, are you doing what you need to do? What feeds your soul? Are you doing that? Because that is going to sustain you. We sometimes talk in healthcare about compassion fatigue, when in fact, it's more like empathy fatigue, that people have so much empathy for people, because when we're demonstrating compassion, when we're actually, doing something about others' issues, that feeds us, and that's self-sustaining. But empathy, you can't overdo empathy, and there's got to be that right balance with doing what you need to do for yourself. Anything else?
Not at this moment, no.
Okay, great. So how are we doing for time, Kalpna? We've got till 2:00, right?
You had me stumped there for a second. It's like, oh my goodness, did I give you wrong information? Don't stress me out, David.
I don't need to add to your stress.
We have till noon. And
okay, great.
Just as an alert to everyone, you can ask, because of the format we have here, you can actually pose your questions through the chat box, or which identifies you, and sometimes people aren't always interested in identifying themselves. You can use the hand icon that's in your screen, and that'll send an email directly to me. Only. So you can send me, if you have a specific question, send me an email directly, and I will bring those up later. But we have till noon, and so we've got some time. And it's
awesome.
Not till 2, David, just till noon.
Great. Thank you, Kalpna. Okay, so let's move on, and let's take a look at complexity. Okay, so with respect to complexity, one of the important EQ competencies is reality testing. So once again, this is about the fact that we're all biased. We have unconscious biases. We have to mitigate against those. We have to test our perception of reality with others' perceptions of reality. And so again, this is the argument for getting diverse perspectives, inviting other people in for a more collaborative approach. Is it as complex as I really think it is? And who are the experts who know about that, for whom it's less complex and they have a greater understanding and greater clarity of these things? So how can I leverage those people and get those people involved? Again, it's about problem solving, involving others, getting the expertise you need. It's about the impulse control. Again, sometimes we make a snap judgment. We think we have a great a short-term solution, and so we apply that, and that's we call that a band-aid solution, right? It's not necessarily getting at the root cause, and we need to get to we have to take our time, we have to be patient to get to the real issue with respect to complex issues. Then there's this EQ competency of social responsibility. And again, as I mentioned, some leaders think that everyone's like them. They don't need any hand holding, so they don't hold the hands of others, when in fact, other people may need that. They may want that. They may appreciate a bit of hand holding in this time when it might be a good thing. to hold some hands. And so social responsibility is realizing that we're all in this together. That again, some people are struggling with the complexity and need our expertise in order for them to not be adversely affected by the complexity. The goal with complexity is, how can we gain greater clarity? How can we gain greater understanding? It's not the complexity by itself. Again, that is the problem. It is our response to it. It's like the old joke. How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. And so, with respect to complexity, it's like, okay, so this is complex. Let's just calm down. Let's not get, overly anxious about the fact that it is complex. And let's just acknowledge that it's complex. Let's acknowledge that it's going to take time. Let's acknowledge that we may have a few late nights or whatever it is. And then let's just take this again, one bite at a time. Or the journey of a thousand kilometers starts with a single step. Let's take this one step at a time, one bite at a time. And let's control our anxiety to dive in and rush around. And again, have a more systematic approach to this incredible complexity. Okay, so ambiguity. Here, one of our EQ competencies is independence. And if there are multiple interpretations, one of the questions that you want to ask yourself is, what's my interpretation? How do I see this? Uninfluenced by anyone else. What's my stance here? Saw a wonderful bumper sticker one day that said, if you don't stand for if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything. So again, what is independently your perspective on it? What do you think? And what is your interpretation of something that is ambiguous, that is being interpreted in multiple ways? Then it's about speaking up. It's about finding your voice. It's about adding your voice to the team through your skill of assertiveness. Get clarity by speaking up. Be transparent about your thinking. That involves others. It includes others. It brings people together. It makes that team feel closer by you being transparent about your thinking and feeling. Again, there's that emotional expression piece of expressing your feelings to others. When you let people know what's going on for you, you become real. You become human. You become part of the team, and it deepens relationships. And again, there's that social responsibility again. Take the time to explain things to others, provide clarity to others. When people stand back and look at you like you've got three heads, that's a good sign that they consider something to be ambiguous. So there's your opportunity to sort it out, to make it clear, to help with that understanding. And then there's the EQ competency of optimism. And that's the recognition that, yes, things are ambiguous. I love the image, wonderful images related to these various things. And with ambiguity, it's like, it's like a big knotted ball of fishing line or something. And then clarity is having it sorted out, is straightening out that mess and having something simple or even just finalized. And once again, I encourage you to type in your thoughts and your comments and your questions related to ambiguity and some of these competencies that we're talking about. How to develop your independence, how to become more assertive, how to find your voice. How to think about others and give back of your expertise that you've gained over the course of your career, knowing that they haven't been in the workforce as long or haven't had the same course of study or the same certification or credentials as you. How can you be more responsible as a contributing member of that team? And then again, optimism. as I hope you realize, I could speak for hours about any one of these things because they're so deep. This is this time that we've got together is like this quick little skim over the surface of a very broad and very deep topic. We now have 3 decades of research on emotional intelligence and all of these different variables, and we know a lot about them. So optimism is about, is about the fact that you have a choice on which you focus. Optimism, if you go back and look at that wheel model, is in the category of skills relating to stress management, because how you look at things determines how stressed you will be. So this is the added suggestion or tip here related to managing stress and being better at tolerating the stress that you're experiencing. And it is about, what are you focusing on? Where is your attention going? And if your attention is going on all the things that are wrong or all the doors that are closed, then you won't see the ones that are opening. You won't see the opportunity, and you won't realize or see that you're actually going to be okay. Even though you're not okay right now for whatever reason, you're grieving the loss of what came before, or something that's happened as a result of COVID. You may be one of the people who've lost someone during COVID, and it's pretty hard to be optimistic or to say this is going to get better, and you may be grieving. In which case, it's about acknowledging and understanding that you are grieving. But there's a lot of resources on how to help you to grieve in a way that where you acknowledge that you're going to learn to live with your grief, as we all do, and that's one of the aspects of life, that again you're going to go through it, and you're going to deal with it some way. Some people don't deal with it, and it adversely affects their ability to carry on. Whereas the ones who choose to intentionally go about dealing with it by finding a counselor, going into therapy, doing what you need to do, those people are going to be okay. I'm less worried about those people who are taking steps to address their emotions and their emotional intelligence than I am about the people who say, I'm good, it'll be fine, I'm okay, and knowing full well that they're not. Those are the ones you have to worry about. As I mentioned, my colleague who ended his life, it was very odd. We had just spent a long time on the phone together 3 weeks prior, because he was responsible for organizing the presentation to his professional association, and we were talking about my presentation there. He told me a lot about what was going on, but he chose to keep things back from me. He chose to keep back how bad things actually were, and that was unfortunate. And of course, being human nature, I think back to that conversation and think, what could I have said? What could I have done differently that might have been more helpful to him at that time? And of course, we call that the woulda, shoulda, coulda, and of course, we can't go back in time. We have to forgive ourselves and press on and do what we can do from now forward. Okay, so optimism. One more comment on optimism. It is connected to the concept of the growth versus the fixed mindset. And if you haven't read that wonderful book by Carol Dweck called Mindset, highly recommended. She talks about how optimism can create and is at the foundation of a growth mindset. And again, it's about what we choose to focus on and where we choose to put our attention. And if you think that optimism can't be improved, then you have to read the book by Martin Seligman called Learned Optimism, where he breaks down optimism and he looks at various aspects of optimism and says, this can change. You've got to change how you think about things first before you can be more optimistic. And the goal here is to replace ambiguity, and you can kind of have this image of ambiguity as someone who's kind of, standing, looking at all these options back and forth, wondering which one to choose, to agility. We want to change ambiguity to agility. So the goal there is to become more agile. So please type in your questions or comments about ambiguity now, and about any of these EQ competencies that I just spoke about. And Kalpna, if you wouldn't mind reading those out, and we can discuss those as they come in. Anything coming in yet?
Well, I've asked for people to send in questions as well. I've added some of my own kind of comments because I'm faster on the button with this because I'm right here.
Great.
So I don't have the 30-second delay for everyone else. So I've given the information on the book by Carol Dweck.
Excellent.
But also one of those things, and part of this actually comes from meditation, specifically for me from Vipassana meditation, which specifically talks about this too shall pass.
Yes.
In terms of whether it's you're in a great situation or a bad situation, there's that element of impermanence. It'll pass.
Yes, 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 yes. And that is a lovely way to say it, Kalpna. And then there's the old country song, which is, if you're going through hell, keep on going.
Thank you. Other comments from people? It just takes a few seconds sometimes.
Sure, no worries.
And someone made a comment, you know, there have been a few comments here about Trump on the thing, and this is like just paraphrasing Trump, and you know, it is what it is. Did
Trump use that phrase?
Yes, that was in response to the surging crisis and him not doing much about it. But I do have a question, I believe, that's come through. I do.
Okay.
Working with short timelines with values at risk, and everyone is looking at you to get it done. What do you do?
Yeah, great question. And again, there's probably more to it to have a conversation about what you do. But again, I really encourage leaders, and this is kind of a general kind of suggestion, is to share what's going on for you emotionally. So, you know, when you're going up to do a big presentation and you're nervous, just say that. Just go up and say, hey, I'm really nervous about standing up in front of you all, and here goes. And so, well, that just, it breaks the ice, it breaks the tension. And I think that by sharing your anxiety or your stress about having to make those changes or do those things quickly, I think it's going to help. I think it's going to help in the relationships that you have with those people. But by ignoring it and not dealing with it, I think you might be setting yourselves up for a bit of disappointment. It's like when you tell yourself that you're not stressed or that you're not anxious, and you go ahead and you try to do something, the results may not be as good as if you say, okay, I'm stressed, I'm anxious, and it doesn't necessarily have to be with your bosses or your team or the people, just to somebody. Okay, you just agree to do something, you hang up the phone, then you go talk to someone. Share that anxiety, that nervousness, that stress, that fear, that worry, that concern. Talk about what are you worried about? What are you stressed about? What is the stress by doing what you need to do quickly? Is it that haste might make waste? Is that the problem, or is it something else? And then, you know, just really try to address the uncertainty of the situation, knowing that it's a volatile situation. Again, there's some real clear answers to each one of these, and so that's what we want to do moving forward. Other questions?
Not specifically, but I mean, I can speak about something with regards to me personally.
Great.
Because we, early on with the pandemic, and there was that uncertainty with regards to safety protocols and so on, and I have to be thankful to WorkSafe BC because they sent some pretty clear guidelines that I could work on to develop a COVID-19 safety plan for the office. But initially, and I was I didn't want to open it up to the team that much in terms of my level of concern, because we had a drop in revenues, but at the same time we're having these cash outlays related to the conference, and I was really trying to make sure that everyone stayed employed and no one got the hours cut back. And so, but how I kind of reframed it was maybe telling them part of the truth in a way, was saying, okay, so we're in this together, these are some ideas, what do we do to make sure everyone stays employed? And this is what we can do in terms of the safety plans. So there was a bit of vulnerability there, not maybe as much as maybe I could have, but definitely some concerns there, because I said, you know, we're a nonprofit, and we know of so many groups that are really financially in troubling times because they did not pivot. And so, of course, with regards to this, my concern, what I've been losing sleep over the last few days is, okay, I'm kind of taking this organization down this path with regards to this virtual conference. What if I fall flat on my face? Other people's livelihoods are at stake. So these are some of the things we kind of have to live with.
Absolutely, absolutely, Kalpna, and again, you know, it's just so critical and important to express that openly instead of keeping all of that inside you and having it possibly decreasing your effectiveness.
Okay, I don't have any other comments at this point.
Okay, well, let's take a look at our summary here. So what we're suggesting, what we're encouraging is that you take volatility and you refocus on your vision. You know, what is it that you're going to accomplish? And so, yeah, it's volatile right now. Things are rapidly changing, and we may need to make amendments to that vision. But what is it ultimately? What are those values that we stand on? What are the principles that we will not put at risk? Again, you mentioned that when you talked about your personal situation, Kalpna. You said, you know, one of the things that's critical and important here is keeping people employed. Okay, so if you're my leader and I hear you say that, wow, I'm gonna walk through fire for you to help you to realize that vision. And talk about the loyalty and the commitment and the dedication that can bring out of people by simply stating what those principles are that are going to carry you forward and through this time of great volatility. Understanding. And again, if you want to type in any comments, we'll go back to Kalpna to take a look at some of those comments or some of those questions momentarily. I'll keep talking through this slide here. We want to change uncertainty and we want to gain some understanding. Okay, so because sometimes uncertainty goes unexamined. And when uncertainty goes unexamined, then you have greater uncertainty. So how can we somehow reduce the uncertainty and gain more understanding about what it is that we can know nothing about and what it is that we can learn more about and get more information about and gain some greater level of understanding, because with uncertainty comes lack of understanding. And again, what we want to move to, even though the situation remains uncertain, is how can we understand that better? Then we've got the complexity scenario. How are we going to deal with the complexity that we experience right now? We are going to try to gain some clarity. How are we going to do that? One bite at a time. How can we call in who we need to call in? How can we find the research study we need to find? How can we, again, gain some clarity on this incredible complexity, not let overwhelm take us out and render us useless? Then we've got ambiguity. And again, we want to try to move towards greater agility. How can we develop our ability to be agile? And again, bob and weave and go with however this gets interpreted. It's like in the elections, the candidates write two speeches, right? They write their acceptance speech and they write their okay, we didn't win this time, but we'll get them next time speech. So how can we prepare for? How can we have contingency planning? And I know you already do that, and nobody knows that better than some of you folks about contingency planning. What about how can we prepare for all of these eventualities and build our ability to be agile? Okay, so right there, I'm gonna put up my final slide here, and as mentioned, as Kalpna mentioned, if there are questions that you'd like to ask and you don't necessarily want to identify yourselves in this group, you can always send me an email message afterward. I'm so happy, as I hope you get from this. This is my passion, helping people to be better at coping with work and life and being a better leader for their organization, increasing the effectiveness of their organizations. This is my passion. Okay, so Kalpna, what have people typed?
Okay, I do have two questions, and one of them was, how do you deal with the doom and gloom negativity that some team members might have?
Absolutely, and some people will, and we sometimes talk about that as the difference between and it relates to another old saying, as you can tell, I love old sayings, and this one is, pain is inevitable, suffering is optional. So that doom and gloom mentality, that's suffering. When people complain, when people talk about how bad things are, when people and that's their focus, and that's where they kind of stay stuck, that's suffering. And we need to demonstrate what dealing with pain looks like, with dealing with the situation looks like, and we need to role model that as leaders, and we need to call out poor behavior and say things like, I get that you think this is awful, but your comments or you know that way that you roll your eyes or whatever you do with your body language is not helpful. We need to come together right now and support each other. We need to support each other through this, and what you're doing is not helpful. So you have to be a real leader and use your assertiveness skills to call those things out, and in that way, and again, some of these ideas might be helpful, and your situation might be such that, you know what, you don't know these people, they're really difficult to deal with or whatever, in which case I'd be happy to have a conversation with you about this offline. Okay. Any other questions, Kalpna?
I do have one other question, and maybe you could shed some light on this. Is there a particular element of VUCA, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, or ambiguity, that is the most difficult for people to handle? Like, is there any research on that?
Yeah, good question. And as I mentioned, there's a lot of, and just to be clear, I'm not an expert on VUCA. There's just a lot of articles on it, and it's really out there in the business world and organizational effectiveness world. My area of expertise is emotional intelligence. However, I will say that when I read all of these, what is it about these that creates the most unpleasant emotions? We always use that word unpleasant versus negative, because there are no negative or positive emotions. They're just pleasant or unpleasant. But the one that creates the greatest level, and you can kind of see this in each of the others, is uncertainty. So dealing with uncertainty requires a certain courage, and courage requires a certain level of various EQ competencies in order to do it well. Courage is the willingness to face uncertainty, and if we can help people to be willing to face the uncertainty, as was the case with my colleague, unfortunate acquaintance, he lost the willingness to face the uncertainty and chose to end his life. And so we need to make sure that people are still willing to face the uncertainty, even though they may not like it, even though it's unpleasant, but that willingness to face the uncertainty, that's courage. We need to call it out. We need to point it out. When someone is vulnerable, we need to praise them for their courage to be vulnerable. And we need to refocus people on what really matters. And yeah, it's not it's not a pleasant scenario right now. But what do we have? What can we be grateful for? Gratitude is an optimism practice, and helps people to refocus on what's good. And I know that wasn't a complete answer to the question, but it was some part of an answer. Anything else, Kalpna?
No, I think that's about it for today.